This week, I've been thinking about the year I spent as a chaplaincy intern at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. On Monday, many of the people who were injured in the Boston Marathon bombing were taken there, and I can still picture the emergency room perfectly. I spent many overnights on call in those halls. I knew then that I would never have the nerve to be a long-term emergency room chaplain. You just never knew what was going to come through those doors. Well, you did and you didn't. The morning before I went on call a second time, I woke up in tears. I was tearful all day because I knew I'd be in the emergency room that night, and I knew that a certain number of other people would arrive there during my shift, having been seriously injured. And it just seemed like I should be able to pick up the phone and call them and say, "Don't go out." I knew they'd be there, and I knew I'd be there, and I wished I could get in touch with them beforehand, before it was too late. But of course, that's not possible. We can't predict the future. Over and over again this week presented terrible reminders of that, public reminders of how fragile normal life is, and reminded us that there are bad, bad people out there. But also reminded us that for every bad person who'll place a bomb somewhere, there are hundreds more who will run straight into the smoke, even after a second bomb has gone off, not knowing how many more there might be, and help the wounded. And there are even more waiting in emergency rooms to save lives and hold a hand and offer a comforting prayer and love you back together again the best they can in the middle of chaos. We may not be able to vanquish bad guys, but we sure do outnumber them. I'm so grateful for that, and for being together with you this morning, to sit together and pray and think about peace and love and dirt. Another one of my strongest memories from Brigham and Women's Hospital is Ash Wednesday. In case you don't know, Ash Wednesday is the first day of Lent on the Christian calendar. It marks the beginning of a time of fasting and prayer leading up to Easter, which is 46 days later. The supervising chaplain for Brigham and Women's called me the day before Ash Wednesday that year to ask if I would help out. They needed some extra hands to manage the rituals involved. Sure, I said I'd be glad to do it. What's Ash Wednesday? See, I didn't know either. Raised Unitarian. When I got there the next day, I stood by as a fellow intern. A thoughtful and kind Catholic priest got us started. First, he made holy water by waving his hands over a bottle of Aquafina and saying a few words. That's what I thought. I was astonished. Just a regular old bottle of water, a few special words, a wave of the hand, holy water. It was also ordinary, the ingredient and the way he did it. Then that dear, secretly universalist priest mixed the holy water with some ashes from burnt palm leaves. He dipped a finger into the wet ashes. He used it to draw a cross on my forehead, and he said these words: "Dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. Repent and believe in the gospel." Then we were sent out with our own cups of holy water and ashes to do the same to everybody who wanted it, all throughout the hospital. Now, we are trained in hospital chaplaincy to minister in an interfaith context, and that sometimes means speaking in theological language that is not my own. I get that. But the first few times I said, "Repent and believe in the gospel," it felt a little bit like walking into a French restaurant and taking a bite of very ripe, stinky cheese. I knew it was valuable, but I wasn't sure I could swallow it. At first, I kept saying the words because it was my job and it meant something to the people I was blessing, and because I was fascinated by that priest, He had held my hand and prayed out loud for my ministry once. He wasn't a hellfire and damnation kind of guy. As I walked from room to room, I thought about him and the gospel. That word, gospel, means good news, of course. I kept walking and marking foreheads with ashes and repeating the words, repent and believe in the good news. I won't swallow the version of the gospel that drives people away from religion and away from each other, the one in which there's only one right belief, and anybody who disagrees with it, even good people, go to hell. That doesn't sound like good news to me. I kept going from room to room, offering the ashes, saying the words, and thinking. There's another, larger message in the books that comprise the gospel, that every person is a beloved child of God, and that we should love each other. In fact, love one another pretty much sums up the gospel of all of the world's major religions. To repent is to turn or have a change of heart. For the rest of the day, that was the prayer in my heart as I marked the foreheads and said the words, turn and know in your heart that you are beloved. Go and love others. I said it to doctors, nurses, visitors, patients who were there for elective surgery or with pneumonia or with heart conditions, patients who were there with hypothermia because they're homeless and addicted and they passed out under a bridge on a cold night. You are dust, I am dust, and to dust we shall return. Turn and know that you are beloved. Go and love others. And I left a dirty smudge on their foreheads. In the 3rd chapter of the Bible, it is God who speaks the phrase, dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. It isn't part of a lovey-dovey blessing, though. It's part of a litany of curses that God inflicts upon Adam and Eve. The famous litany of curses in which God curses the snake first for tempting Eve, and curses Eve for tempting Adam, and curses Adam for eating from the tree of knowledge and then lying about it. In the 1st chapter of the Bible, God makes Adam and Eve in the image of the gods, yes, plural. In the 2nd chapter, God does it differently, making them from dirt. And in the 3rd chapter, God seems to be saying, yep, dirt. I was right the 2nd time about these sons of guns. In her book, A History of God, Karen Armstrong makes the case that the history of God is really the history of humankind's ideas about God. And since our imaginings of God are almost exclusively concerned with what God thinks about humans, the history of God is in fact a history of how humankind sees itself. That's a really huge idea. The history of God, meaning what God is like and does and says in all the stories that we tell in the Bible and the other texts. The history of God is really the history of humankind's ideas about God. And since our imaginings of God are almost exclusively concerned with what God thinks about humans, the history of God is in fact a history of how humankind sees itself. And all this time you've been thinking that religious myths weren't history. If you found yourself thinking, what is wrong with people this week? Or feeling that even though there are good people in the world, the violence is just overwhelming, then maybe you are in touch with the part of history in which God gets disgusted with us and says in a fit of anger, you people are dirt, and kicks us out of paradise. The name Adam is not just a name but a word in Hebrew. Adam is simply the word for human. It is the masculine form of the word Adama, which means ground or earth. In English, we have translated it pretty much literally. Human is related to humus, which is soil or earth. But just as in the first 2 chapters of Genesis in the Bible, our spiritual ancestors placed 2 creation stories side by side, one in which we are made in the image of gods and one in which we're made from dust or dirt. There are 2 aspects of human nature intertwining. The theologian Reinhold Niebuhr described these as our creaturely side and our spirit side. Our creaturely side represents the fact that humans are animals, part of nature, mortals whose behavior is strongly influenced by biological aspects. The spirit side is the part that is aware of the creaturely side. It is our consciousness and the higher aspirations that come from it. According to Niebuhr, the main pitfall of humankind is our tendency to overemphasize one side. Either we let the creaturely part of us run amok, giving in to urges without thinking, or we overestimate the ability of our spirit side to act independently of the creaturely body and its instincts and urges. Overconfident in our own wisdom and righteousness, we take on the role of gods and end up harming each other. Terrorists fall squarely into this camp with their ideologies. So do dictators and others, including clergy who abuse their power. When God says, "You are dirt," it is a reference to the creaturely side. It has been taken as a curse upon the spirit side, which would prefer to rise above all that. Dirt in that story represents everything that separates us from our spirit nature, which is portrayed as the location of holiness, perfection, and peace. Dirt represents decay. It represents bodies that are limited, that age and break down, or don't conform to our ideals. It represents the capacity for unraveling, destruction, and chaos within us, our propensity for self-harm by disobeying our better wisdom, our propensity for harming others. We've been trying to separate ourselves from the dirt, or at least dominate it, ever since. In the Christian tradition, people who repent and believe in the gospel are symbolically washed clean of sin through baptism. They are born again when they emerge from the clean, clear water. Cleanliness is next to godliness. I don't know if anybody says that anymore. It's such an old saying. But just last month in the New York Times, there was an article with the headline, "Unhappy? Clean house." It's still out there. When I was a kid, there was a family in my neighborhood that was known as the family with the dirty house. People talked about it. How could they live that way? The funny thing is that our neighborhood, which consisted of 2 rows and 3 cul-de-sacs of mobile homes, was in the gritty part of town. Bad part, the dirty part. The mobile homes weren't nice. The floors beneath my home's carpet were rotting out and sometimes broke through if you stepped too hard. How do we decide who or what is dirty? We want to separate ourselves from the dirt. But our subconscious need not just to manage, but to vanquish everything dirty gets carried away. That's true literally. Our germ phobia and dirt phobia are now turning out children who are allergic to everything and have immune problems. And it's true in terms of our relationship to the earth. In large-scale modern agriculture, instead of working with the soil and forming practices to support it, we've kept trying to dominate it through chemical modification and unsustainable practices. We are literally doing away with the best dirt, stripping the earth of topsoil, which is going to make us hungry. And this story, in which "dust thou art" is presented as a curse, represents our alienation from our own wholeness, a rejection of flawed bodily selves. But you know, there are other stories in the history of God, which is the history of humankind's perception of itself, that suggest a different perspective. Look at the story of Moses and the burning bush. That's in Exodus, the part of the Bible that comes right after Genesis. Moses is out for a walk alone, and when he sees a bush that is flaming, he notices that it's on fire, but it's not being destroyed. The writer William Bryant Logan says he was always perplexed by that passage and even found it annoying. If God was going to get Moses' attention, why not just show up? But when Logan undertook a research project on ecology, and specifically on dirt, he found himself thinking about that story again and feeling like he'd finally figured it out. Moses does not see a technicolor fantasy, says Logan. He sees the bush as it really is. He sees the bush as all bushes really are. All that is living burns. This is the fundamental fact of nature, he says. The world as it is known to God, he says, is not a world of isolate things, but of processes in concert. The world as it is known to God, or better yet, as we know it through God. If God's history is our history, then God's knowing is our knowing, right? When Moses then hears the voice of God saying, "Take off your shoes, you're standing on holy ground," Logan says that God is asking Moses to experience in his own body what the burning bush experiences, a living connection between heaven and earth, the life that stretches out like taffy between our Father, the Son, and our Mother, the earth. If you do not believe this, he says, take off your shoes and stand in the grass or the sand or the dirt. This story is, in fact, a profound blessing of the physical world, of its processes, and by extension, of humankind and human bodies. The Zen Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh tells of a time when he was out walking, and just as he was about to step on a dry leaf, he saw the leaf in the ultimate dimension. He had a kind of vision. Not one in which he saw something that's not real, but one that revealed reality more clearly to him. He saw that the leaf was not really dead, but was merging with the moist soil in order to appear on the tree the following spring in another form. Everything is pretending to be born and pretending to die, he said. He remembered the Buddha's words, "When conditions are sufficient, the body reveals itself, and we say the body exists. When conditions are not sufficient, the body cannot be perceived by us, and we say the body does not exist." In that sense, the soil is the ground of being, literally. It is that entity from which we emerge and to which we return and from which we emerge. What makes holy ground is seeing the ground, the dirt, the clay, for what it really is. Ground of being, part of us, the part that represents mortality, earthliness, bodies. I am dust, you are dust, to dust we shall return. And we look for the holy in different ways. Christine and I collected this dirt from the Santuario de Chimayo, where people arrive from great distances in search of healing. When we gather in prayer, the place where we gather is also made holy by our gathering. What makes water holy is just seeing it for what it is. Life-sustaining, flowing, passing through all living things, it represents spirit, which is also part of who we are and what we are. We can't exist without it either. We dedicate our children with water as a symbol of interconnectedness. Special words don't make the water holy. The power of special words is to remind us that it already is. Our sacraments and our blessings don't make us beloved. They remind us that we already are. Dust we are, and to dust we shall return. At the hospital, we drew crosses, but here I prefer a circle. A circle is a symbol of wholeness and interconnection. Vance, turn and know that you are beloved. Go and love others.
Christine. Turn and know you are beloved. Go and love others.
Angela. Turn and know that you are beloved. Go and love others.
You are invited to come forward and receive this same blessing. In contemplative silence, we'll form aisles, we'll form lines down the 3 center aisles. And if you'd prefer to receive the blessing on the back of your hand, you can do that by just holding your hand out. If you prefer to stay in your seat, you are also beloved, and may use this time for contemplation.